The soft ding of the cabin chime echoed gently overhead. The final boarding call for Flight 614 had already passed, and the doors were sealed. Outside, the fading orange glow of the Atlanta sky bounced off the silver fuselage of the Crescent Airlines Airbus A320. Inside, plush seats lined the business-class cabin in symmetrical rows, each one a tiny capsule of privilege, noise-canceling headphones, hot towels, and the kind of silence that money can buy. Skylar Kent adjusted her blazer, brushing away an invisible thread from the lapel. Her polished badge gleamed under the soft overhead lights. Skylar Kent, flight lead attendant. This was her 8th flight this month and her 2nd as lead. At 28, she was well ahead of most in her training class. Meticulous, professional, charming. She prided herself on being unshakable, no matter how chaotic the sky or the passengers. But as she made her initial rounds through the business cabin, checking tray tables, confirming meals, she saw something that made her step slow just a little. Seat 2A. It wasn't the seat, it was the passenger. An elderly black woman sat quietly by the window, a soft teal head wrap elegantly framing her face. Her silver braids peeked through the sides, tucked neatly behind her ears. She wore a beige knit cardigan over a pearl-white blouse. Her pants were creased, her shoes polished. In her lap sat an open book, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Hardcover. Worn, but loved. Skylar hesitated. It wasn't that the woman looked out of place, but something in Skylar's conditioned, quietly programmed mind registered a dissonance. A glitch in the system. The woman didn't look like the business class type. It was a shameful, creeping thought, but it was there. She approached with a practiced smile. Good evening, ma'am. I just wanted to double-check your seat assignment. Sometimes there's confusion at boarding. The woman looked up. Calm. Composed. Her eyes were a deep brown, touched with wisdom and storms. Why would there be confusion? Skylar's smile strained. Oh, just that people sometimes sit in the wrong cabin by mistake. May I take a look at your boarding pass to make sure everything's squared away? The woman stared at her for a beat longer than comfortable. Then, with slow precision, she opened her tote bag and handed Skylar a neatly folded pass. Shaw, Evelyn B., Seat 2A, Business Class. Skylar stared at it a second too long. Oh, thank you. That's all I needed. She forced a polite nod and stepped away quickly. As she turned, Evelyn Shaw gently said, You expected me to be somewhere else. Skylar froze. I didn't mean anything by it, ma'am. Evelyn tilted her head. Didn't mean anything or didn't expect someone like me to sit somewhere like this? Skylar's heart kicked in her chest, and heat rushed to her cheeks. She mumbled something about standard procedure and turned away, her hands trembling as she reached for the tray cart. Behind her, Evelyn returned to her book. But that wasn't the end. 5 minutes later, Skylar's co-attendant Lauren came up beside her in the galley, eyes wide. Did you seriously try to move Evelyn Shaw out of 2A? Skylar blinked. Wait, what? You know her. Lauren gave a look like Skylar had tried to throw Oprah off a throne. She's the Evelyn Shaw, first black woman to serve on the Georgia Supreme Court. Civil rights litigator before that. She marched with King. Got death threats for protecting voting rights in '84. She's been on CNN, NPR, hell, there's a documentary about her. Skylar's stomach dropped. Oh my God. Lauren leaned closer. She's flying to LA for the National Judicial Honors Gala. She's getting the Lifetime Integrity Award tonight. Skylar turned and looked back toward 2A. Evelyn was still there. Calm. Regal. Her left hand rested lightly on her book. Her fingers wore no rings, but there was something about her posture that screamed royalty. And Skylar had tried to exile her to coach. The turbulence that followed wasn't in the sky. Word spread quickly. A man in 3C, clearly aware of who Evelyn was, gave Skylar a long, disapproving look when she offered him sparkling water. Another passenger whispered something behind a menu. It didn't matter if Skylar had meant no harm. The harm was already done. And Evelyn? She hadn't said another word. Not one. She just read her book, occasionally lifting her eyes to the clouds outside the window. During dinner service, Skylar approached again. This time, her voice was softer. Miss Shaw, would you prefer salmon or filet? Evelyn turned a page. I'm not hungry. Would you like something to drink? I'm fine, thank you. Skylar stood there, tray in hand, burning with shame. It would have been easier if Evelyn had raised her voice. If she'd complained to the captain. If she'd posted a video to social media or demanded compensation. But she didn't. And somehow, that silence hurt worse. Night descended over the country below. The plane soared westward, and Skylar sat alone in the galley, sipping lukewarm tea, her mind spiraling with embarrassment and guilt. Her entire career had been built on professionalism, but in one moment, she'd let a lifetime of quiet bias slip through. Why had she assumed Evelyn didn't belong? Why had she needed the boarding pass to believe her? She stared into her tea, seeing only her reflection and Evelyn's eyes, calm but unflinching. And she realized she hadn't just doubted Evelyn's seat. She doubted her worth. The cabin lights had dimmed, bathing the interior in a hushed, bluish glow. Outside, the stars shimmered above clouds like crushed diamonds, and the engines hummed a steady lullaby. Most passengers in business class had reclined their seats and slipped into silk-lined blankets, but Skylar Kent sat rigid near the galley, hands clenched in her lap. Her mind was spinning in a storm of regret. Evelyn Shaw had not moved, not spoken, not even made eye contact since Skylar's earlier mistake. Yet the silence of that decision echoed louder than any confrontation could have. It was one thing to be corrected, but to be silently dismissed by someone whose very presence commanded respect, someone who had spent decades dismantling injustice with words and wit, that was a punishment Skylar had not anticipated. She needed to make it right. Grabbing 2 small linen-wrapped desserts from the galley tray, a warm apple tart and a dark chocolate mousse, Skylar made her way back up the aisle. Seat 2A was still upright. Evelyn was reading again, this time a slim leather journal that sat open beside her lap. Her pen moved slowly, deliberately, as if each word weighed something. Skylar knelt beside the seat, lowering herself out of eye line from the rest of the passengers. Miss Shaw. Evelyn's eyes lifted briefly, then returned to the page. I brought you dessert. On the house. I said I wasn't hungry. Her voice was calm, even. No malice. But steel lay just beneath it. I know, Skylar said, holding her ground. I wanted to apologize. Now Evelyn set down the pen. You've already apologized, she said without emotion. Skylar blinked. I didn't. Not really. I made an excuse earlier, said it was procedure. But it wasn't. I judged you. I saw you sitting here and I assumed. Evelyn's eyes fixed on her. Deep brown. Quiet. Unyielding. Assumed what? She asked softly. Skylar's throat dried up. That you didn't belong in business class, she finally said, her voice cracking. And I'm ashamed of that. A pause. Evelyn leaned back and studied her for a long moment. Why do you think that was your first thought? Skylar hesitated. I don't know. I didn't grow up racist. I've worked with people of every background. I've volunteered in underprivileged schools. Stop. Evelyn held up a single finger. Skylar fell silent. That's not what I asked. Skylar looked down. Because somewhere along the line, I learned to associate wealth and success with whiteness. With people who looked like me. Evelyn didn't nod. She didn't smile. But she listened. And even though I know better, Skylar continued, it's like there's this wiring deep down that short-circuits my better judgment sometimes. I never would have said it out loud. But I thought it. That's the problem, Evelyn said finally. The thoughts you don't say are the ones that do the most damage. Because you think they're harmless if they stay in your head. But they bleed out. In tone, in hesitation, in questions disguised as procedure. Skylar looked up. How do I fix it? Evelyn's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. You don't fix it in one flight, she said. You fix it over a lifetime. Then she picked up her pen and returned to her journal. Skylar stayed on her knees a moment longer. Then, with a respectful nod, she placed the desserts gently on Evelyn's tray table and walked away. Back in the galley, Skylar felt a tightness in her chest that wasn't there before. She should have felt relief she had owned up to her mistake. She had apologized. But she knew now that words weren't the currency of redemption. Actions were. Lauren peeked around the curtain. Everything okay? Skylar shook her head slowly. No. But maybe that's the point. In row 2, Evelyn Shaw wrote without pause. She didn't write about Skylar. She didn't need to. She wrote about strength. About how Black women have always had to earn their place twice, once by skill and again by grace. About how even in seats they bought with their own money, they are often made to feel like imposters. About how every journey in America, even at 36,000 feet, is still uphill for some. She paused only once to take a bite of the apple tart. It was good. Not perfect, but good. Hours later, as the captain announced descent into Los Angeles, Skylar moved through the cabin, doing her final checks. When she reached 2A, Evelyn was already upright, tray stowed, journal closed. The leather cover was embossed with initials, EBS. Skylar stopped and spoke, this time not as a flight attendant, but as a woman in awe. Miss Shaw, I read about you. Evelyn raised a brow. And? You inspire me, Skylar said quietly. Not just because of what you've accomplished, but because of how you held your dignity when I didn't deserve it. This time, Evelyn smiled. Just a little. You'll get better, she said, grabbing her carry-on. If you want to. Skylar's voice trembled. I do. Then start with this, Evelyn said as she stood. Next time you see someone who looks like me in a seat like this, don't check their ticket. Just offer them a drink. And with that, Evelyn Shaw walked down the aisle, her back straight, her presence unmistakable. Los Angeles was a city of noise. Horns, sirens, shouting tourists. But Evelyn Shaw moved through LAX with the calm quiet of a woman who had never needed to raise her voice to be heard. She declined the offer of a wheelchair. She declined assistance with her bag. She walked, slowly but deliberately, through the terminal, her steps the same ones she had marched in Montgomery, sat with in Selma, and stood with on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. She wasn't just a Black woman with a first-class ticket. She was history in motion. Outside, a Black Lincoln waited for her at the curb, engine running. The driver stood straight as she approached. Miss Shaw, he greeted with reverence. May I take your bag? Please, she said with a nod. Once inside the leather-cushioned back seat, Evelyn finally exhaled. She pulled out her phone. 3 messages from her niece, Jasmine, who was waiting at the family home in Baldwin Hills. Evelyn didn't respond yet. She stared out the window as palm trees slid by, memories stirring with every block. Not memories of fame or headlines, though there had been plenty, but memories of moments no one ever saw. 1967, Richmond, Virginia. She was 28. A teacher. Her classroom had been integrated for just 3 months. She remembered the spit on her chalkboard, the slurs on her door, the white parent who demanded her removal for the safety of the children. She didn't cry then either. She simply taught with more brilliance than they'd ever seen. She won awards. Her students, Black and white, aced national exams. Slowly, the spit stopped. The slurs faded. Respect took root. But it never came freely. It was earned with bloodless war. That was the story people didn't understand. That every ordinary Black success had, underneath it, the weight of invisible battles. Battles that aged her bones. And yet, even now, decades later, respected, Published, known, she still couldn't fly without having to prove she belonged. Even now, back in the airport terminal, Skylar Kent sat in the crew lounge, uniform unbuttoned at the neck, her phone buzzing on the metal table beside her. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she stared at the passenger manifest. There it was. Seat 2A, Evelyn V. Shaw. V. Shaw. She'd Googled her between drink service and landing. It had taken all of 10 seconds. Civil rights pioneer. Author of Refusing to Vanish. Founder of the National Coalition Educate with Equity. Honored by 3 presidents. Honored posthumously by Coretta Scott King. Except, Evelyn wasn't posthumous. She was still here. Still walking. Still resisting. And Skylar had tried to move her like she was just another anomaly. She felt sick. Sky. Lauren entered the lounge with 2 coffees. "Did you hear me?" she asked. "We're off shift. Let's hit In-N-Out before the hotel." Skylar looked up. "I think I messed up worse than I thought." Lauren sat, concerned now. Skylar turned her phone around and showed the screen. Lauren read the bio. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God. That's the woman from the seat." Skylar nodded. "She's a legend." "I know," Skylar whispered. "And I treated her like a problem." Lauren looked pained. "Look, you apologized." She didn't raise hell. If anything, she handled it with grace. "That's not the point." Skylar closed her eyes. "The point is, she shouldn't have had to be graceful. She should have just been able to be. No explanation. No proving herself. Just exist like any other old white man in a tailored suit flying business." Lauren was quiet. "You're right," she finally said. "But maybe this is your wake-up call." Skylar scoffed. "I've had plenty of wake-up calls. I just keep hitting snooze." That night, Evelyn sat on the balcony of her niece's home, the city twinkling below like a nervous heartbeat. Jasmine brought her tea. "You didn't tell me you were flying commercial," she said. "We could have sent the foundation plane." "I like to watch people," Evelyn said with a smile. "It keeps me honest." Jasmine sighed. "Did they treat you right?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Then, some did. One didn't. Then tried to. Jasmine sat down beside her, sipping her own mug. "You're always teaching, even when you don't mean to." Evelyn chuckled. "And people are always learning, even when they think they're not." The breeze rustled the trees. Down the hill, a police siren wailed faintly. Jasmine looked over. "Still fighting the same fight?" Evelyn looked at her with a fire that had never gone out. "I didn't survive it to stop now." Elsewhere in LA, Skylar walked alone through the dusky sidewalks of Venice, guilt pressing against her ribcage like tight air. She passed murals of Black icons, Malcolm, Maya, Baldwin, Parks. She paused under one in particular. A mural of young Black girls seated at a segregated lunch counter, being screamed at by mobs. One of them looked like Evelyn. She whispered to no one, "I'm sorry." Not because Evelyn demanded it. Not because it would erase the moment. But because change doesn't start when history forgives you. It starts when you stop defending who you were and start becoming who you could be. It had been 5 days since Flight 227 touched down in Los Angeles. 5 days since Evelyn Shaw had walked off the plane in silence. And 5 days since Skylar Kent had slept without waking at 3 a.m. with Evelyn's eyes in her mind, eyes that had seen centuries packed into decades. On the 6th day, Skylar did something she had never done in her 5 years with Blue Stream Airlines. She asked for the manifest log. "I need to write a formal letter," she told the base supervisor. A passenger issue. Technically, it was allowed. Rare, but not against policy. What she didn't say was that she'd already drafted the letter 5 times. None of them felt worthy. After some digging, she found the official email for the Shaw Equity Foundation, a small, plain-text site with Evelyn's signature across the footer and a line that read, "For speaking engagements or correspondence, please contact jasmine@shawfoundation.org." Skylar's fingers hovered over the keyboard. then typed. Subject: regarding Flight 227, a personal apology. Dear Ms. Shaw, you may not remember me by name, but I remember everything about that day. My name is Skylar Kent, and I was the flight attendant on duty in business class seat row 2 during your recent Bluestream flight from Atlanta to LAX. What I did was wrong. Not just professionally, not just ethically, but humanly. I asked you to move seats under the unspoken assumption that you did not belong there. I made you feel unseen in a space you paid for and earned. But worse than that, I projected onto you a long history of indignities I should have known better than to continue. I am not writing for your forgiveness. I know I have no right to expect that. I am writing because, as I read more about who you are, what you've survived, and what you've stood for, I realized I've been silent too long. I've been complicit in ways I never had to examine before. If you are willing, I would be honored to meet with you. Not for public redemption. Not for a photo. Just to listen. To learn. Thank you for your work, for your presence, for not becoming what the world might have made you. Respectfully, Skylar Kent. She hesitated only briefly before hitting send. Then closed her laptop and waited. 2 days passed. No reply. On the third day, Skylar received a one-line response. Miss Shaw will meet you. Tuesday, 3 p.m. Baldwin Hills. Address attached. Jasmine. No pleasantries. No emojis. No warmth. Just clarity. It was more than Skylar deserved. Tuesday arrived with heat. Not just the weather, though the California sun was relentless, but the kind of heat that swells inside your chest when you're walking toward a reckoning. Skylar stood outside the modest but dignified bungalow. Gardenias flanked the walkway. The front door, painted deep blue, was slightly ajar. She knocked once. The door opened fully, and there she was. Evelyn B. Shaw. No makeup. No medals. Just a flowing navy blouse and soft gray slacks. Her silver hair was tied back, her eyes tired, but sharp. Come in, Miss Kent, she said simply. Skylar entered like she was stepping onto sacred ground. The home was quiet, filled with books and photographs. Civil rights marches. Old classrooms. A younger Evelyn beside Martin Luther King Jr., a black and white shot of her being arrested, eyes defiantly calm. Would you like tea? Evelyn asked, already moving toward the kitchen. Skylar shook her head, then stopped herself. Yes, please. If it's no trouble. Evelyn gave a small smile. Tea is never trouble. Minutes later, they sat across from each other in the sunlit parlor, hands wrapped around identical porcelain mugs. Skylar took a breath. I meant what I said in the letter. I know I don't. Let's not waste time with disclaimers, Evelyn interrupted gently. We both know what happened. The question is, why? Skylar blinked. You mean, why I did it? Yes. Skylar looked down, then back up. I think I saw what I expected to see, not what was there. Which was what? Evelyn asked, not cruelly, but directly. Skylar swallowed. A black woman who didn't match the usual profile of our first-class flyers. You mean white? Male? Young? Loud? Yes, Skylar said quietly. Evelyn stirred her tea. The thing is, she said after a moment, I don't expect people to be perfect. I expect them to try harder once they know better. Skylar's eyes misted. I want to. I am trying. I believe you. Silence fell again, this time gentler. Like a pause in music, not a breakdown in conversation. Then Evelyn leaned forward. Do you know why I fly business class, Miss Kent? Skylar shook her head. Because when I was 25, I had to sit at the back of the bus. Not figuratively. Literally. Even after graduating college. Even after becoming a teacher. The white driver told me I looked too comfortable up front. So he made me move. Skylar's breath caught. I made myself a promise that day, Evelyn said. If I ever made enough to sit in the front of anything, I'd do it. Not to prove something to them, but to prove something to me. She smiled, small, but radiant. So I buy the seats, Skylar. Every time. For that 25-year-old girl who couldn't have one. Skylar wiped her cheek. I'm sorry, she whispered again. Not just for what I did, but for all the ways I didn't see until now. Evelyn reached across and placed her hand over Skylar's. You see now. That's a start. Later, as Skylar walked back to her car, she felt lighter. Not absolved, not redeemed, but invited into a world she had once overlooked. And in that world, she knew every seat mattered. Because every seat held a story. The Los Angeles International Airport was unusually packed for a Thursday morning. Spring break travelers moved like confused schools of fish through terminals, dragging squeaky wheels and overstuffed duffels. There was tension in the air, delayed flights, coffee shortages, and frayed patience. But in Gate 12B, something different was happening. A gathering, a buzz, and a slow wave of silence. It started when a Bluestream gate agent suddenly stood up from her desk and put her hand over her heart. Two TSA officers paused their stride and nodded. A teenage boy dropped his phone, wide-eyed. Evelyn V. Shaw had entered the terminal. Not because she wanted attention, but because she always flew commercial. Always stood in line. Always carried her own tote, her own books, her own dignity. And this time, she was headed to D.C., invited to speak at a national education symposium. Skylar Kent, meanwhile, was at the other end of the same terminal. She hadn't known Evelyn was flying today, hadn't been scheduled on her flight. In fact, she was flying standby for a weekend visit to her sister in Portland. Until she saw the crowd shift. And then the whispers. That's her. That's Evelyn Shaw. She's the reason they changed the policy, right? Didn't she get insulted by a Bluestream flight attendant? I heard the CEO called her personally. Skylar froze. And then she saw her. Evelyn, dressed in a tailored olive coat and soft white scarf, was sitting, ironically, on a bench near the window, waiting to board. No fanfare. No press. Just presence. Skylar's heart thudded. She hadn't expected to see her again after their tea. Hadn't planned for more words. But something in her feet moved before her mind did. She approached slowly, afraid to disrupt. She almost turned away. Then Evelyn looked up. Straight at her. A pause. Recognition. Then, Miss Kent. Skylar offered a hesitant smile. Miss Shaw, I didn't know you were flying today. I tend to do that, Evelyn said, much to the surprise of security and schedule makers alike. Skylar gave a soft laugh. There was a beat of silence. I heard, Skylar said, about the changes. Evelyn nodded. Corporate sent a statement. Said all Bluestream flight attendants are now undergoing bias training. That a passenger's seat can never be questioned unless there's a security issue. That visual profiling is a zero-tolerance offense. I'm glad, Skylar said. You helped that happen, Evelyn added. I don't know about that. I do, Evelyn said firmly. You took responsibility. You wrote. You showed up. And you listened. Skylar swallowed. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does, Evelyn replied. Which means you're probably doing it right. A group of students nearby noticed them. One girl approached cautiously, holding a copy of The Cost of Silence, Evelyn's memoir. Miss Shaw, could you sign this? Evelyn smiled and took the pen. Of course, sweetheart. Skylar watched as more people gathered. But not like fans at a concert. Like witnesses to a kind of gravity they didn't fully understand but couldn't ignore. Then Evelyn looked up and said, "Walk with me." Skylar nodded, and together they strolled slowly toward Gate 15, where Evelyn's flight would depart. Do you want to know the real reason I didn't switch seats that day? Evelyn asked. Skylar blinked. I thought you were making a point. Evelyn chuckled. Oh, I was. But not the one you think. I didn't move, she continued, because when I was a young girl, my grandmother told me, one day they'll try to shame you out of spaces you've earned. Don't move. Let the shame stay where it belongs. Skylar stopped walking. Those words hit like gospel. You taught me that too, Skylar whispered. Evelyn placed a hand on her shoulder. I hope you teach it forward. They reached the boarding gate. The agent there immediately offered Evelyn early access, but she declined with a graceful wave. I wait with everyone, she said. Before stepping into line, Evelyn turned back one last time. Oh, and Miss Kent? Yes. There's a new training module your airline's launching next month. Empathy and Altitude. They've asked me to help design it. And I requested one name to co-facilitate. Skylar's eyes widened. Who? You. Skylar stood frozen. I wouldn't know what to say. Evelyn smiled. You'll find the words. You already have. And then she was gone, moving toward her gate, leaving behind the scent of lavender, the silence of reflection, and the beginning of something greater than redemption, transformation. That night, Skylar Kent didn't wake up at 3 a.m. for the first time in weeks. Instead, she dreamed of a plane. Of Seat 2A. Still occupied. Still earned. And finally respected. The morning was gray, typical for an early December day in Washington, D.C. Outside the window of the airport conference room, the sky was a mixture of clouds and fog, leaving a quiet chill in the air. But inside, something much warmer was unfolding. Skylar Kent stood near the podium, adjusting the microphone as the hum of the crowd simmered down. The rows of chairs before her were filled with attendants, managers, pilots, and even a few directors from Bluestream. All of them, like her, had been invited to witness the launch of a new era in aviation culture, an era that would teach compassion, sensitivity, and responsibility to the next generation of flight professionals. Skylar glanced to her side. Evelyn stood there, calm and poised, just as she had been that fateful day in the terminal. Her olive coat now replaced with a sleek blazer, she radiated authority, not because of her fame, but because of her integrity. The clock read 8:15 a.m., and the session was about to begin. You ready? Evelyn whispered, her smile both reassuring and confident. Skylar nodded, taking in a deep breath. She had gone from being the recipient of change to now the agent of it. What had once felt like a single moment of chaos had transformed into a powerful narrative, not just for her, but for every person in the room who would soon be touched by it. I'm nervous, Skylar admitted. Evelyn patted her shoulder. Good. Nervousness means you care. Just tell your truth. You'll do fine. The lights dimmed, and the screen behind the podium flickered to life. The audience went quiet as the opening video played, a montage of travel, flight attendants welcoming passengers, pilots greeting crews, and all the moments in between that defined air travel. But there was an unmistakable shift in tone as the video progressed. It showed passengers of all backgrounds, ages, races, and orientations, each of them carrying a unique story. It didn't matter where they sat or who they were with. What mattered was that they belonged. The video ended with a simple phrase, everyone has a seat. No one should ever feel they don't. Skylar stepped to the microphone, taking a moment to let the weight of the words sink in. She had prepared for this day for months. Yet, nothing could have truly prepared her for the gravity of speaking in front of a room full of people who had been directly affected by the changes she had helped bring about. She couldn't help but think back to that one moment on the plane, the instant she realized she was part of something much bigger than herself. Good morning, Skylar began, her voice steady. I want to thank you all for being here today. What we're doing here isn't just about policy changes. It's about creating a culture of belonging. A culture where every passenger, no matter their skin color, background, or socioeconomic status, can board a plane and feel welcomed, respected, and valued. A murmur of agreement spread through the room. 2 months ago, a very different conversation would have taken place in this very room, she continued, scanning the room. And 2 months ago, I was part of an incident that could have spiraled out of control. But I realized something. I wasn't the problem. And neither was Evelyn. The problem was the system, the bias that had been allowed to fester without being addressed. Evelyn nodded, her arms crossed as she leaned against the wall. Her presence was a silent strength, reminding the room that every word Skylar spoke was one of hard-earned wisdom. "I will admit," Skylar said, a slight smile curling her lips, "I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to speak today. I didn't want to relive the incident. But then I realized, if we don't do this, then what are we really saying? That it's okay to let these moments slip through the cracks." She paused, letting the silence hang for a beat. "I was once the woman asking myself what my seat, my space, meant. But today, I'm here to tell you no one should ever have to ask that question. No one." There was a collective pause in the room, as if every person was now seeing the picture, a picture that had been too easy to ignore until it was inescapable. Skylar turned to Evelyn. "I'd like to invite someone who has been at the forefront of these changes, someone who has given me more than just guidance, but a deep sense of purpose, to speak now." The crowd turned toward Evelyn as she moved toward the podium. She wasn't nervous. She didn't need to be. Her voice would carry what had to be said, in the way it always had. When Evelyn spoke, it was direct and powerful. "Thank you, Skylar. I know this isn't easy. I know the pressure you've been under. But that's why it's so important we create spaces where people don't feel they're doing this alone. We aren't just talking about policies. We're talking about dignity." She took a deep breath before continuing. "Many of you know that my story isn't just about what happened on that flight. It's about a lifetime of fighting for what's right, for what's fair. I've lived through times where I didn't even have the right to sit at the front of a bus, let alone a seat on a plane. But each time I fought, I was reminded that the fight isn't just about the seat. It's about the person sitting in it. It's about owning that space and reminding others they have that same right." She turned to Skylar. "And that's what we're doing today, isn't it? We're reminding the world that every person has a seat and that no one should ever feel unwelcome in their place." The room was still. You could feel the shift. You could feel the new energy in the air. As Evelyn stepped away from the podium, Skylar knew the work wasn't over. It would never be over. But today, they had set the groundwork for something far more powerful than any policy change. They had set the foundation for a future where people understood what it meant to truly belong. After the session, as people gathered in small groups to discuss the implications, Skylar found herself standing near the window once again, staring out at the tarmac. She could hear the murmur of voices around her, but there was a moment of quiet peace in her heart. The world hadn't changed overnight, but it had shifted in a way that would never be undone. The seat in 2A was no longer just a symbol of entitlement or privilege. It was a symbol of equality, of human connection. And Skylar Kent, the young woman who had once doubted her own place in the world, now stood firm in it. She belonged, just like everyone else.